I spent my life saving money because I believed financial stability was happiness. The day I finally reached my goal, I realized I had been chasing the wrong thing. They told me early on, if you want peace, you have to earn it. And the way you earn peace is through stability. A roof that is yours. A bank account that does not blink red. A job with health insurance. Savings, no debt, retirement plan, maybe a dog if you're lucky. That is what I heard growing up. That is what I believed. My dad was not a bad man, but he lived in constant fear. Fear of losing the house. Fear of the power bill. Fear of running out of gas 2 days before payday. And because of that fear, he was always tired. Always angry. Always preaching that money was everything. That if you could just stack up enough of it, the fear would finally go away. So I made it my mission. From my first job stocking shelves at a grocery store when I was 16, to pulling 12-hour shifts on a factory floor in my 20s, I saved. I skipped meals, skipped vacations, skipped the social life. While my friends were out blowing their checks on weekend getaways and bar tabs, I was calculating interest rates on high-yield savings accounts. Every dollar had a job. Every minute of my life was part of some long game. Because once I reached the finish line, the point where I had enough, then I could finally breathe. Then I could be happy. That is what I kept telling myself. The sacrifices made sense back then. I drove the same dented car for 11 years. I turned down a cross-country move with someone I loved because it would have jeopardized my steady job. I missed birthdays. I missed weddings. I missed a lot of things. But I was building something that mattered. People called me disciplined. I wore that like armor. What they did not see was the fear underneath. The fear that if I slipped up once, I would fall into the same panic I saw in my father's eyes every time a bill hit the mailbox. I checked off every box on the list. No debt. Emergency fund stacked. Roth IRA maxed. Credit score near perfect. A solid job that paid just enough to keep the stress at bay and let me sleep at night. I hit the goal at 37. I was officially stable. That mythical status I had been chasing my entire adult life? I had it. I was the guy people asked for budgeting tips. The one who could actually say, I am good, when asked about money. And for a while, I thought the feeling creeping in was peace. But it wasn't. It started subtly. A quiet. Not the peaceful kind. More like the kind of silence that follows a power outage. I would wake up on Saturdays with no anxiety, but also no excitement. I would check my accounts and feel nothing. The goal had been reached. But the happiness I had promised myself, where the hell was it? I kept thinking, maybe I just need time to adjust. But as the weeks rolled on, the emptiness got louder. It started to drown out the pride I once felt. Until one morning, I found myself staring at my reflection, toothbrush in hand, and the thought hit me hard. Is this it? Is this really all there is? And in that moment, something cracked open inside me. Not broken, just exposed. Because the peace I had been chasing, it felt more like a pause than a reward. And the finish line I had worked my whole life to cross, it suddenly looked like the beginning of something I did not understand at all. It had always been about the number. There was this figure in my head, somewhere north of 6 months of living expenses, 0 debt, steady income with a cushion. A number that said I was safe. A number that meant I had made it. And I hit it. I remember the day like it was supposed to be a celebration. It was just past 9 on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in my little kitchen, laptop open, oatmeal getting cold while I refreshed the app and saw my savings tick over into the safe zone. There it was. The number that meant I could breathe. But I just stared at it. Blinked. Closed the tab. No rush of joy. No relief flooding through my chest. No, hell yeah, moment where I pumped my fist and felt like I had finally won. Just silence. And that same ache in the center of my chest I had been blaming on stress. That was the first real moment I felt confused. Like, maybe I had misunderstood the assignment. Because I had been telling myself for years that money would buy peace. Not luxury. Not yachts or sports cars. Just peace. But now that the numbers lined up, I was still waking up with a heaviness I could not explain. I was still living alone in a studio apartment that felt more like a waiting room than a home. Still eating the same pre-packed meals out of convenience. Still going to work and coming back feeling nothing. The idea was always that stability would bring space. Space to enjoy life. Space to figure out who I was when I was not grinding. But all I found was more time to realize I had no idea what that meant. Friends started saying I seemed off. They thought I should travel, or take up a hobby. Get a dog, maybe. Something to shake the dust off. But none of it sounded appealing. Not because I didn't want joy. I just didn't know where to find it anymore. I had built a life around avoiding chaos. And I succeeded. But in the process, I forgot how to want anything else. There was one night, late, just past midnight. I was sitting in bed scrolling through old messages, and I found one from Sarah. She had been the last person I truly cared about. We almost moved in together, but I turned it down. Told her I was not ready. Truth was, I was afraid. Afraid that if something went wrong, I would lose everything I had worked for. She said she understood, but she left not long after. Moved to Seattle. Married now, I think. Reading that old message hit me harder than I expected. She had said, I just wanted a partner, not a provider. I never responded. Back then, I thought she was missing the point. Now I was starting to think maybe I had. The more I sat in that silence, the kind that money could not fix, the more I started wondering if I had sacrificed too much chasing a version of peace that never really existed. And just as I was starting to wrestle with that thought, something happened. Something I did not expect. Something that made the quiet feel a lot less safe. It started with a knock. Not a loud one. Just a steady, polite tap on the door. I barely registered it at first. I had been sitting on the couch, TV remote in hand, letting some cooking show play while I scrolled through job listings. Not because I needed a new job, but because I was bored. Restless. Like maybe the right posting would jump out and give me a sense of direction again. Then the knock came again. Louder this time. When I opened the door, I was expecting a package. Maybe a neighbor. Instead, it was my older brother, Nate. Now, to be clear, we are not close. We talk maybe once a year, usually on birthdays or holidays when our mom reminds us. But there he was, standing on my porch with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a look in his eyes I had not seen since we were kids. Not anger, not pity, just desperation. He asked if he could crash for a night. Said something vague about things falling apart and needing to reset. I let him in because I didn't know how to say no. And maybe, deep down, I was craving some kind of disruption. Something to stir the still water. We sat in silence for a while. I offered him a drink, but he waved it off. Eventually, he set it straight. He had lost his job. His apartment was gone too. His girlfriend had left the week before. I asked him if he needed money. He laughed. A short, bitter laugh. You think this is about money? I didn't know how to answer that. Because for me, it always had been. He crashed on the couch that night, and the next day turned into the next week. He started opening up, little by little. Stories about things I never knew. How he had gotten into debt helping someone he should not have trusted. How he had been too proud to ask for help until it was too late. But it was not just what he said, it was how he said it. He talked like someone who had lived, like someone who had made mistakes and gotten messy, but actually had something to show for it. That messed with me more than I expected. Because here I was, the stable brother. The one with savings and structure and a perfect record. And yet, I was the one who felt hollow. One night, he asked me what I had been up to. Like, really up to. I froze. I wanted to say something meaningful. I wanted to talk about projects or people or plans. But all I could think to say was, I've been good. And it sounded like a lie. He stared at me for a second. Then he said, You ever feel like you build a house with no windows? I asked him what he meant. He said, You've got walls. A roof. Safe as hell. But there's no view. No light. You ever wonder what you're missing? That one stuck with me. I had spent so long locking out the fear that I had accidentally locked out everything else too. But I was not ready to admit that. Not yet. So I changed the subject. Told him I had an early morning. Said we would talk more tomorrow. But that night, lying in bed, I kept hearing that line over and over. A house with no windows. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. I had been so focused on surviving. I had forgotten how to live. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. It was still dark outside, just that faint blue-gray light peeking through the curtains. I sat up and stared around the room. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be, neat, quiet, organized. Nothing out of place. And yet I felt like I could not breathe. It hit me all at once how rigid my life had become. Same breakfast. Same clothes, rotated like clockwork. Same routes, same podcasts, same conversations with coworkers that never strayed beyond weekend plans and office gripes. At some point, I had mistaken control for comfort. I had stopped asking questions because I already had all the answers, at least the kind that fit on a spreadsheet. But now, with Nate sleeping on the couch and that offhand comment of his echoing in my head, I could not unsee it. I had built a routine so airtight that nothing could surprise me anymore. No pain, sure, but no joy either. Later that day, I went for a drive. No destination. I just turned off my phone and started going wherever the road felt unfamiliar. I ended up 2 towns over, parked outside some old diner with a flickering neon sign that said, "Open 24 hours." I sat there for a long time, watching people come and go. Construction workers, truckers, a couple of teenagers who looked like they had nowhere else to be. Nobody in a rush. Nobody with a 5-year plan written on their forearm like a tattoo. And then it happened. I saw her. A woman I had not seen in over a decade. Her name was Tess. We had gone to the same high school. Back then, she was wild in a way I never understood. Late nights, impulsive road trips, always chasing something just out of reach. I was the exact opposite. We had dated, briefly. She said I made her feel grounded. I said she made me nervous. And like most things that did not fit my timeline, I let her go. But there she was, stepping out of that diner with 2 cups of coffee and a kid on her hip. She looked happy, tired, sure, but alive in a way I had not felt in years. She glanced at me. Our eyes met. I do not know if she recognized me or not. But in that moment, I realized something strange. I had reached everything I had ever wanted. And yet somehow, I had missed everything I actually needed. I drove home in silence. Nate was gone when I got back, just a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Thanks for the roof. Time to face my mess." No signature, just that. I stood there holding the note, realizing I envied him. Not for his situation. God no. But for the fact that he still believed life could surprise him. Me? I had planned my way into a corner. And for the first time in my life, I was starting to think the plan was not enough. A few days passed. I went back to work, answered emails, hit my step goals, ate balanced meals. On the outside, everything looked solid, stable. But inside, I was starting to feel like I was pretending. Not depressed exactly, just dulled. Like someone had turned the color down on my life. I kept telling myself I should be grateful. I had what so many people wanted. A dependable paycheck. No debt. No major stressors. A quiet apartment. A car that started every morning. And the ability to buy whatever I needed without checking the price tag. That used to feel like a dream. Now it just felt like background noise. I would stand in the shower and catch myself thinking, "You have no right to feel this way." And maybe I didn't. But that didn't change the fact that I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I felt truly excited about something. That is when I started going back through old photos. It was just a random impulse, something to kill time before bed. But I ended up staying up for hours scrolling through albums on my phone. Pictures from my early 20s, messy apartments, beach bonfires, late-night ramen runs with friends I had not talked to in years. There was one photo that stopped me cold. It was me and Sarah, standing on a hiking trail just after a thunderstorm. We were both soaked, laughing, covered in mud. The background was blurry, but I could tell we were somewhere high up. Maybe Mount Rainier? She had her arms around my neck, and I was squinting at the camera, grinning like an idiot. I could not even remember what we had been fighting about that morning, but I remembered how it ended. Both of us gasping for air from laughing so hard after I slipped and landed flat on my back in a puddle. That guy in the photo? He looked lighter, less polished, sure, but alive. I had forgotten what that felt like. And it hit me. Maybe this feeling I had been brushing off as boredom was something else entirely. Maybe it was grief. Grieving for the version of me that believed life could be more than just stable, that it could be surprising, messy, beautiful. I had been so determined to protect myself from chaos that I ended up walling myself off from everything unpredictable, including joy. That realization stayed with me the whole week. I kept waiting for it to pass, for things to snap back into place. But they didn't. Instead, something shifted. A quiet itch. A small voice in the back of my head whispering, "You built the life you were told to want. Now what?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I could not keep pretending that the life I had was enough, just because it looked good on paper. And just when I started wrestling with that truth, the phone rang. The number was familiar. Too familiar. And with it came something I never expected to face again. It was my mother. I had not heard her voice in over a year. Not since our last conversation ended in silence, followed by a string of unanswered texts. She was never cruel. Just distant. Disappointed. Like I had built the wrong kind of life, one she could not quite connect with. She always said the same thing, in different ways. It is good you are doing well financially. Or, at least you do not have to worry like we did. And maybe that was her version of love. But it never felt like enough. So when her name lit up my phone, I stared at it for a solid minute, thumb hovering, frozen between instinct and hesitation. Then I picked up. She skipped the small talk. Just said, "Your father's in the hospital." My stomach dropped. It was not life or death, at least not yet. Something cardiac, caught early. He was going to be okay, but she was shaken. Her voice cracked when she asked if I could come. I said yes without thinking. The next morning, I was driving across state lines in the same car I had owned for years, windshield still cracked in the corner, the same travel mug rattling in the cup holder. I had made that drive dozens of times before, but this time, it felt heavier. The last time I had visited home, my father had made a comment about me finally getting my act together. He meant it as a compliment, but it landed like a slap. Like everything I had sacrificed to get here, Sarah, my time, my 20s, was just a box checked in someone else's spreadsheet. And yet, here I was again. When I walked into the hospital room, he looked smaller than I remembered, older, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. He gave me a weak nod and mumbled something about work. Even now, hooked up to wires and machines, he was asking if I was still doing fine money-wise. I said yeah, more than fine. He closed his eyes and nodded, like that was the only thing that mattered. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Because I had chased stability so hard. Partly because I wanted peace, but also because I thought maybe, just maybe, it would make him proud. But it had not. Not really. He just saw numbers. Never the cost. And standing there in that sterile white room, I realized something I never wanted to admit before. I had spent most of my life trying to earn love from someone who only knew how to respect success. And when I finally got that success, I felt emptier than ever. On the drive home, I did not turn on the radio. I just sat in the silence, letting everything churn. The money had done its job. It had shielded me from fear, from chaos, from dependency, but it had not brought meaning. It had not fixed the parts of me that still longed to feel seen, or understood, or genuinely alive. And the scariest part? I was not sure what would. I pulled into my driveway just past midnight. And for the first time in years, I did not go inside. I just sat there in the dark, engine off, staring at my own front door. Because now the question was loud, demanding, impossible to ignore. If this is not the life I want, then what is? I finally got out of the car sometime after 1 a.m. The house was quiet, just like always. The lights I had put on timers kicked on right as I stepped inside, like clockwork. The hallway lamp, the one above the sink. I had programmed them months ago, telling myself it added a sense of warmth. But all it ever did was highlight the silence. I poured a glass of water and stood in the kitchen, staring at the photos on the fridge, mostly other people's kids. My friends' families. Holiday cards. Smiling faces that faded into the background after a while. Not a single picture of me. That was when it hit me. I had built a life that looked complete from the outside. But none of it felt like it belonged to me. Every step had followed a plan. A safe plan. A respectable one. Get the degree. Get the job. Avoid debt. Save aggressively. Retire early. It all sounded great. But somewhere along the line, I had stopped asking what I actually wanted. I was not even sure I knew. Did I want a family? I used to think so. But I let Sarah go because she did not fit the plan. I had no one now. No one waiting at home. No one to text when I had news. Nobody to share the silence with. I had told myself I was okay with that. But was I? Because now, in the middle of the night, with the house clean, the fridge full, and not a single unpaid bill in sight, I felt like a guest in my own life. I sat on the couch and scrolled through social media. People were posting about concerts, road trips, messy dinners, even their kids scribbling on walls. And for once, it did not annoy me. It made me jealous. Not of what they had, but of how unafraid they seemed to live messy. How they made room for chaos, for laughter, for connection. I had made room for none of that. Everything I owned could be found in a labeled drawer or a spreadsheet. Everything I controlled stayed right where I left it. But I had not touched a paintbrush in over 10 years. Had not written anything just for fun since college. Had not had a deep, meaningful conversation with someone in months. The security I built was real. But the life? It felt like something I had rehearsed for so long, I forgot I was supposed to perform. I stared at my hands, steady, capable, tired. And I asked myself, quietly, is it too late to start over? That question terrified me, but not as much as the idea of staying exactly where I was. And the next morning, I did something I had not done in years. I called in sick. When I told my boss I was not coming in, he barely reacted. Just said, "Take care of yourself," and hung up. That was it. No questions. No check-in. No, "Are you okay?" Just a quick sign-off from a man I had given a decade of my life to. I sat there, holding the phone, realizing I could disappear for a week and no one would even notice, so long as the reports were filed and the deadlines were met. It was a quiet kind of slap. I made some coffee, but it tasted like cardboard. I took a walk, but every street looked the same. Even the park, the one I used to jog through when I first moved here, felt like it belonged to someone else's routine. I had been so focused on surviving that I never built anything worth living for. And now, with nothing urgent to do, no fires to put out, no invoices to track, I was just floating. I ended up back home by noon. Sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the old guitar in the corner, the one I used to play before real life started. I had not touched it in years. My fingers hesitated as I reached for it, like they were asking permission from some version of myself I had buried. It was out of tune, dusty. The sound came out rough and uneven, but something about it felt real. I played until my fingers ached. Nothing fancy, just old chords I barely remembered. A song or two that used to mean something when I was younger and stupid enough to dream big. For a moment, the air shifted. Not enough to call it peace, but enough to make me feel like I existed again. Then I checked my phone, and there was a message from Sarah. 3 words, "I heard about Nate." I had forgotten we still had a couple of mutuals. For a second, I debated not replying. What was the point? But curiosity won out. I just typed, "He's okay. You doing all right?" She wrote back almost immediately. Said she was doing fine. Asked if I was still playing guitar. Said she remembered how terrible I was at singing, but how much I loved it anyway. I smiled. First real smile in a while. Then she said something I was not ready for. "Do you ever wish we had tried harder?" And that cracked something open. I did not answer right away. I stared at that message like it was a puzzle I had never solved. Because the truth was, yeah. I wished I had chosen love over a Roth IRA. I wished I had picked chaos over control. I wished I had made space for someone else before my life became a fortress. But I never said that out loud. Until now. "I do," I wrote back. But I was too afraid to admit it. She did not reply right away. I figured maybe that was the end of it. But after a while, she sent one more message. "It's not too late to want more." Just that. 10 words. And somehow, they shook more loose than all the paychecks, promotions, or perfect credit scores ever had. That night, I did something I had not done in years. I turned off every single device in the house. No email, no calendar reminders, no financial podcasts humming in the background, telling me how to optimize my future. I just sat on the floor, back against the wall, feeling everything I had tried to outwork for the last 15 years. And I let it in. The regret, the confusion, the gnawing question that had haunted me ever since I hit the number. What now? I had been so focused on making sure I never ended up like my father, bitter, afraid, counting pennies, that I never stopped to consider what I actually wanted to become. I had built a fortress of savings, discipline, and routine, but I had not built a life. The realization made me feel sick. Not in a panicked way, more like grief. Grief for the birthdays I missed. For the friendships that quietly faded away while I stayed late at work. For the love I traded for security. For all the versions of me I buried under checklists and quarterly goals. But here is the part that surprised me. Once the grief settled, something else came in behind it. Not hope, not yet, but permission. Permission to want something more. To want beauty, mess, connection. To screw up and not have it mean total failure. To laugh in the middle of a bad day. To go somewhere without a plan. I picked up a notepad. Not my usual goals notebook. Just a regular pad with a pen that barely worked. And I started writing. Not numbers. Not projections. But things I missed. Late night drives with the windows down. The smell of coffee in a crowded diner. Getting lost in a conversation that makes you forget to check the time. Singing badly on purpose. Feeling something so strong you have to write it down before it slips away. It was a strange little list. A personal one. No one else would understand it. But it was mine. And the more I wrote, the more I remembered who I used to be. Who I might still be underneath all the armor. At some point, I stopped writing and just sat there, breathing in the quiet. But this time, it was not suffocating. It was full of possibility. And that is when I decided I would not add another dollar to the pile until I figured out how to live without needing it to prove I mattered. Because if money was the goal, I had won. But if meaning was the goal, then I was just getting started. The shift did not happen all at once. There was no dramatic quitting of my job, no sold everything and moved to the mountains moment. It was quieter than that. Slower. Almost uncomfortable. I kept my job. I paid my bills. The money stayed where it was. But I stopped asking it to be my identity. That was the real change. I started saying yes to things that made no sense on paper. A weekend trip with no spreadsheet attached to it. Dinner with coworkers I usually avoided because it was not productive. A community guitar class that met on Wednesday nights and paid nothing but noise and laughter. The first few times, I felt guilty. Like I was betraying some unspoken rule. Like one wrong move could collapse everything I built. It did not. The money did what it was supposed to do. It sat there, quiet, supportive, no drama. And for the first time, I realized that was its proper role. Not a destination, a tool. I met Sarah for coffee a few weeks later. No big emotional confession. No rewriting the past. Just two people acknowledging that timing matters and fear has a cost. We did not promise anything. We just stayed present. That was enough. I visit my father now without trying to prove anything. I no longer need his approval to feel worthy. When he asks about work, I answer honestly, and then change the subject. Sometimes, we talk about nothing important at all, and somehow, that matters more. The emptiness did not disappear overnight. It still shows up now and then, usually when I slip back into old patterns. But now I recognize it for what it is, a reminder, not a failure. Money gave me stability. It gave me safety. It gave me options. But meaning? Meaning came from choice, from connection, from allowing my life to be imperfect and human and unfinished. I used to believe happiness waited at the end of a checklist. Now I know better. Money can support happiness, but it cannot create it. And for the first time in my adult life, that truth does not scare me. It feels like freedom.